Welcome back to Clash of the Commanders 2, the British or Loyalist edition. My name is Ranger Adrian and I work at 96 National Historic Site in 96, South Carolina. This week we are answering the question, who was the most influential British or Loyalist leader in the backcountry? Since I chose Nathaniel Greene last week, I thought this week I would choose his counterpart, General Charles Cornwallis, who left the door wide open to patriots to take all the Carolinas except for Charleston. Although a proven and capable field commander, the mistakes Cornwallis made in the Carolina backcountry would lead to the fall of the Carolinas and Georgia. Born in London on New Year's Eve, 1738, Cornwallis came from an aristocratic family. He was educated at Eton, and in 1757 purchased his first field commission as an ensign in the 1st Foot Guards. In 1760 he became a member of Parliament, and during the 7 Years' War spent most of that time in Germany, where he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. When his father died in 1762, he became the 2nd Earl Cornwallis and took his place in the House of Lords. When the 7 Years' War ended, Parliament began passing taxes and acts on the American colonies. Cornwallis often voted in favor of the colonial position. However, when the Revolutionary War seemed inevitable, Cornwallis was promoted to Major General by King George III, and he sailed to the Americans in 1776. Upon arriving, he served under General Henry Clinton at the first attack on Charleston. He then headed north with General Howe. While in the north, Cornwallis played a major role in the fall of New York City, but he was defeated at Princeton. After winning the battles of Brandywine and Germantown, he returned to England for a little bit. While he was gone, Howe was replaced by Clinton, which made Cornwallis the second in command. After leaving the Americans for a second time, he returned along with Clinton to capture Charleston in 1780. After the fall of Charleston, Clinton left Cornwallis in command of the South, while he returned to the North. However, before leaving, Clinton changed the policy on how paroled patriot soldiers were treated. Initially, as long as they agreed not to pick up arms against the crown again, they would be left alone and freed. Clinton, however, on June 3rd, 1780, proclaimed that unless they joined and fought with the Loyalist army, they would be considered hostile. This proclamation had the opposite of the desired effect, as it drove many of those paroled patriots back to the patriot camps to fight the Loyalists and British. Clinton also left Cornwallis with the orders to safeguard and secure South Carolina. At first, Cornwallis did very well at following these orders, as he set up a chain of strongholds with 96, Camden, and Georgetown, and the smaller post in between. His victory at Camden, however, seemed to open a way for a scheme that did not follow Clinton's orders. Despite knowing Clinton would not approve, he believed the best way to defend South Carolina was to enter North Carolina, destroy the partisan fighters and the remaining Continental Army that was there. And so he ordered Major Patrick Ferguson to the westernmost of South Carolina and Tarleton to guard Charleston, while he would move up into North Carolina. To Clinton, he wrote, "It may be doubted by some whether the invasion of North Carolina may be a prudent measure, but I am convinced it is a necessary one, and that if we do not attack that province, we must give up South Carolina and Georgia and retire within the walls of Charleston. As often happens, Cornwallis's plan does not go well, as Ferguson was defeated and killed at Kings Mountain, halting Cornwallis's march. This defeat, along with the fierceness of the locals in the Charlotte area, a fierceness that Cornwallis liked as a hornet's nest of rebellion, forced him to fall back to Winnsboro, South Carolina, where he awaited the arrival of more men under Major General Alexander Leslie. Despite the delay, Cornwallis remained convinced that he needed to invade North Carolina. On January 18, 1781, he received word of the Battle of Cowpens and the defeat of Tarleton. The next day, he set out after Daniel Morgan. However, his movement was slow. This was partly due to the fact that his army had extra luggage, extra baggage, partly because the rains had swollen the rivers to flood point, and partly because he did not have good intelligence on the terrain. Whereas Greene had ordered the terrain and the rivers surveyed, Cornwallis was relying on local knowledge. If he couldn't get locals, however, to guide him, then he was lost. He could not navigate them as well. Because of this, he lost at least 2 days by taking the wrong road. Already behind in pursuit, he decided the best way to speed the army along was to burn excess baggage. Although he was set on this course of action, Cornwallis was not unaware of its dangers. He wrote Rawdon on January 25th, 1781, "My situation is most critical. I see infinite danger in proceeding, but certain ruin in retreating. I am therefore determined to go on." Despite his efforts, Cornwallis was outmaneuvered and outrun by Greene's army. Knowing he had been drawn too far away from his supply and communication routes, he withdrew to the Hillsborough, North Carolina area to attempt to convince local Loyalists to join his forces. However, he's very disappointed in their turnout. He wrote that our experience had shown that their numbers are not as great as had been represented, and that their friendship was only passive. When Greene returned to face Cornwallis at Guilford Courthouse, the British general finally got the fight that he was craving. But despite winning the field, found his forces had drastically been diminished. The previous summer, Cornwallis had written Lieutenant Colonel John Harris Cruger that the possession of the backcountry is of the utmost importance. Indeed, the success of the war in the Southern District depends totally upon it. But now Cornwallis found himself with no choice but to leave the backcountry and head to the coast and eventually Yorktown. By obsessing about entering and taking North Carolina, Cornwallis left South Carolina and Georgia wide open so that the Patriots could come and take backcountry and eventually the coast. The troops that were left behind, the Loyalist troops that were left behind, were too far apart and too few. They could not defend it. So Cornwallis's actions and obsessions drove the southern backcountry into the rebels' hands. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join us next week for our next Clash of the Commanders.